All right, so good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to be ending the polling now, so get those votes in while you still have the time. But yeah, we are going to be talking today about, here we go, master data management. So good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Kyle Bachner. I'm one of the sales engineers here at Decisions. And today we're going to be talking about master data management. So we'll be covering topics like data validation, duplicate checking, and interceptor rules, and how they relate to this topic as a whole. Before we get started, and for those of you who are new to Decisions, we are a business process automation management software that helps non-technical people easily automate business processes without the need to code. On this slide are some of our current customers in different sectors to give you an idea of where Decisions fits. We're equal parts rules and workflow, so there's a lot of different problems we could solve across different industries. And here's my lovely headshot, so you can match a name with a face. And yes, I did recently get glasses. I've had the pleasure of meeting many of you on webinars or over video calls in the past, but we're going to be discussing some of our upcoming events. So come and experience us virtually, I guess. Connections and questions on LinkedIn are also welcome. So please feel free to add any of the SE team there if you would like. Okay, so let's talk about what we have coming up this month. Next week, we have our fundamental certification. So that will be for people who want to try and get that cert so they can next take that developer level certification. So you do need the fundamental in order to have that developer level cert. But basically all this course is going to do is make sure that you know how to use the 5 designers within Decisions competently. It's basically the same internal training that we do our first month here, so you get to learn from us. All right, so next we have the beginner and intermediate training that is in a couple weeks. So users that are new to the platform and never built anything in the tool, you're going to want to use beginner training. And for those of you who are a bit more experienced, feel free to sign up for that intermediate. You can look online and see, what the requirements are if you fit, or if it is a match for that, for that training. All right, so we also have another webinar coming up. That's going to be on advanced forms, specifically in version 7. So we get to learn about all the new form features and specifically how we can apply validation and visibility rules using our new active form flows. And very last at the end of this month is our System Admin and SDK or Software Development Kit course. So this is going to be for those of you who are responsible for actually maintaining and monitoring that Decisions install. It's a 2-day course, and we're going to cover installation options, hardening recommendations, server types, and how to use our built-in reporting and tracking tools. So when you guys sign up for these trainings or any of these events, please make sure you double check the time zone and make sure that it's one that fits with where you are in the world. So again, double check the time zone, make sure it works for you. We don't want you waking up at 2 in the morning if you don't have to. So our agenda for today, we're just going to go over what is master data management, how Decisions can act as that source of truth. That is, how can we get data into Decisions? And then how can you use Decisions to help automate this process? I have some short examples that were built so we can poke around in version 7 and see how we can actually get this data in and manipulate it. And then we'll have a short Q&A like we always do at the end. All right, so as we go throughout this webinar today, just make sure we take a look at our Zoom panel. It should look like this one on the slide. I trust all y'all know how to use Zoom at this point. But if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in that Q&A, or if you need something urgently, raise your hand. We have a few other members of my team on the call, so they'll be here to help out to answer questions as I'm talking. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about master data management and what it is. So at a high level, master data management is ensuring the quality and consistency of that source of truth across an organization. Since data can come in from a variety of sources, it's critical that consistency is maintained across every version of the data so that everyone accesses the same data. Having multiple versions or multiple sources of data inherently means that maintaining that consistency is going to be pretty inefficient. so we can put processes in place to help automate it. This is where a technology like Decisions can come in, using a workflow and rules engine to help collect, verify, and report on this data. To set the stage a little bit, I'm not a master data management expert, so we'll be discussing these types of applications at a high level, talking about different parts of our platform and how it can come together to create this type of solution. So, how can you use Decisions as your source of truth? So Decisions can act as that orchestration layer, and it can be used as your source of truth, aka your master data list, whatever you want to call it. It is built on a SQL server in the backend, so you have the ability to store and access data, which we'll talk about more today. Using the workflow and rules engine together, you can automate your master data management process and even create reports and metrics based off of them. That's using Decisions' built-in reporting engine, and KPIs can be created and hosted on a dashboard as well. In addition, we can create some data visualizations, so you can create charts and graphs off of that data that you're collecting or that you have already collected inside of Decisions. Once you get that data in, you can then use the full power of our tool to create and automate your process. So let's first talk about how we collect that data. And we're going to be talking about data structures as our introduction to this. So data structures and Decisions, they're just a way where you can create that data or object that can store, that is stored and passed in as a record on a table. Or that's how 95% of them work, since there are data types that only save in memory. So if you only have really sensitive, or so if you're working with very sensitive data and you don't want it to store anywhere, we can support that as well. But anyways, different data types are going to give you some different functionality, but I'm not going to get in the weeds and talk about the difference between these types. You can find that information in our documentation or through our training videos. Once your structure is made, you can use those CRUD steps, those create, read, update, and delete steps in your workflow to store and access data in this table. Most common way to access data in a structure, though, is just creating a report on it, since you'd then be able to host that on a dashboard and expose it to your end user. But really, it's whatever way makes sense, makes the most sense to the project that you're building and the functionality that you want to have. Just keep in mind the differences between data structures before you actually start building your projects. So we're going to be talking about, all the different ways to get the data in. And in all these examples, we're going to be assuming that Decisions is being used as the master data source, so all data will be stored there. Just know this doesn't have to be the case. One of the most common data sources are CSV files, or comma-separated value lists. These are pretty similar to Excel spreadsheets, which I'm sure everyone here is familiar with. And there are two common ways to get data from a spreadsheet into Decisions. Both of these ways involve creating a data structure with the same fields as the spreadsheet columns. And once you create this, you can upload data to that structure directly, just like importing data into a table. Another way is to use workflow steps to map the spreadsheet to your data structure, and then using a loop and CRUD steps to store this data in Decisions. And we'll see that example later on when we get in the tool. Using similar logic, you could save data to other locations as well, but there are enough tools within Decisions or within the platform to help make parsing through structured data a bit easier. In order to create that Excel or CSV file, if you'd like for it to be an output, there are a few steps available. But it doesn't have to be the case that Decisions is your source of truth. So if you want, just an Excel file as an output, you could totally do that. But let's talk a bit more about how we get data in. So Decisions also allows you to connect to those external sources of truth, and that does include external databases. That's any database with ODBC connectivity can be connected to in our platform. And once this connection is made, drag and drop steps become available in your workflow that allow you to interact with the records on that table. When creating this connection, Decisions also has some wizards that will hold your hand a bit to walk you through the process and make sure it's set up correctly. More things can be done than just adding this table connection, though, since Decisions can do things like table joins, so you can manipulate and report on your data as well. But for the purposes of this webinar, we're just going to keep the scope down and only talk about the data management. So to manage these tables you've connected to, the steps available in your workflow, again, will be those CRUD steps, and you can limit which of these actions are available to certain users. So you won't be exposing all your data to everyone. You can still control who has access to what, similar to any other data within decisions. All right, and now gathering data from external systems. So because decisions can connect to any system with an open API layer and make those RESTful API calls, we could parse through those returns or that return packet. So once we define that REST service, it becomes a step in our toolbox that's able to be used like all the other drag and drop steps within decisions. Exception handling can be added to workflows as well, so you have ways to log and monitor flows and make sure that calls are working properly. These services can be used to fetch data from external systems, but can also be used in other ways with master data management. For example, and we'll see this example live as well, our built-in USPS module has a step for address normalization that calls the Postal Service's database. So this could be used in a workflow to normalize all employee addresses in an onboarding procedure, or just to validate that an address is real and current. Since any system with an open API layer can be connected to, this normalization and validation of data in your workflow can be done calling these different services. One of the examples we do here during our standard demo is connecting to one of Google's machine learning tools, their vision label detection service, and we actually send an image to Google and a keyword to see how confident it is that that image is whatever that word or phrase is. So that's one way you can connect to those ML or AI tools to help with the data cleanup. My colleague Tim had a great webinar on that a few weeks ago, so feel free to watch that if you would like. But we can also just create that logic in our workflow so you don't have to connect to external systems. As long as you have that defined and you know how decisions works, you can just create your logic and manage it all in the platform. All right, so one more common type of data that's used, especially in these master data management applications, is everyone's favorite unstructured data. So that's data coming primarily from sources like PDFs or emails, that unstructured text where it could look like anything. So it's important to make sure that you're able to read all of your data. And Decisions actually has some steps specifically to help with reading these emails and PDFs. Decisions can integrate with your mail server and monitor your inbox for any incoming mail. And once that's received, it can grab all the information and parse through it just based on whatever logic you define in your workflow. PDFs can be used in a similar manner. So not only can Decisions create PDFs, but it has the capability to read through them and find some text. Once text is found, rules and workflow steps would be used to manipulate and structure it in whatever way makes sense. So in all the examples we've talked about so far, we're assuming that the data would be stored in Decisions. And I just want to make sure that we are all on the same page with understanding that data won't be stored unless you use a step to save it to that table. So when using an API call for a validation, for example, you might not want to save whatever the return is from that call, and you don't have to. You define what data is saved and then store it to that structure in Decisions, or at least for the webinar, that is our main purpose. So once we have all that data and Decisions, what can you do with it? So because Decisions is not a data management solution out of the box, you get to use the rest of our tool to help build this kind of solution. So we are a business process automation workflow and rules engine, and that means that you can create your master data management solution using our workflow and rules. Your organization knows your rules best, so by using our graphical rule designers, you can define that logic that's needed to manage your data. This can be around validation, normalization, or organization. And because of the flexibility of our rules engine, it's pretty easy to make changes on the fly to your logic. By using these rules in a workflow as well, you're able to take advantage of the power of the workflow engine and the thousands of steps available in our toolbox. Data can be fetched from multiple sources. It could be run through rules and workflow steps in order to manipulate it, and then either pushed back out to another system or stored in Decisions to be used as your master data set. Just one thing to note, your logic does need to be predefined and very explicit. So unless you're connecting to one of those AI solutions or ML solutions, Decisions is pretty black and white with how those rules are run and evaluated, and that's similar to programming languages, and that is on purpose. So just make sure you have your entire process mapped out and have that logic there so you know how to handle this data manipulation and any exceptions that you may have. This data from multiple sources, it could be combined into a common data type, and that could be reported on within decisions in order to create actionable dashboards and gather metrics for KPIs. And if you're interested in doing a deeper dive and looking at those components specifically, then feel free to look up on our documentation flow sourced reports and calculated columns, and that will help give you some more information, or check out our previous webinar on reports. But yeah, I'm sure y'all are tired of seeing slides, so let's just go ahead and hop into decisions and just walk through these quick examples that I have built just so we can see how master data management solutions can function. Okay, so what we have real quick is I have currently built this dashboard that just has 3 reports here for us. So I'm currently in the Decision Studio. That's the developer side of our platform. And here I'm just on a dashboard with these 3 reports where the company A and company B are just the reports from those specific companies. And then we have a master report here showing us what is the actual data source happening, or the actual source of truth. And what we're going to do for this example is I built an action in this first report here so we can actually just edit that data. So we're going to say that, we're going to edit this. We're going to say there's 40 on hand now instead of 37. So I'm just going to go ahead and submit this request, or I guess someone coming in who's just able to edit that data. Use your imagination for who would be doing this. But I'm going to say, hey, we had that wrong. I recounted. We now have 40 on hand. So let's go ahead and submit that. And in this workflow, what we've done is just created just a example for someone who has to actually review this. So we had this review data change down here. I could go ahead, click that assignment, since this was just tasked for me to actually observe, or sorry, not observe, tasked for me to work as a task. So all I did here was just come into my inbox where I just had this task for me, showing me what the original was and what those changes are. So this could be, for example, an admin looking over what the changes in your table are, and you can just deny or approve it directly from here. So when I approve that, it drops off my list because it's just an assignment. But if we go back to that dashboard, fingers crossed, things did not work. And welcome to a live webinar, folks. Let's go ahead and look at what happened with that flow then. All right, so I'm currently in the wrong flow for that, but we'll at least talk about how this was actually set up. So as I was talking about before, one of the easiest ways or most common ways to get data and decisions is uploading it via a CSV. So here I'm just using a step called CSV to object mapping. And just to show you how this actually works, we just have to define that input. Here I'm uploading a file, and then I'm just defining that output type as a data structure I've created. Make sure that you have your input data right, so it knows you're reading a CSV. Ignore the column headers if you have to. And then when we step into the show item mapping editor, we can actually see how we are getting the different values from our CSV into our data structure. So just so you know what we are actually looking at, we currently have just this list. If I can find it, here we go. We currently just have this list of addresses. That is, again, just a CSV. So just opening up in Excel real quick, where we just have address, city, state. So this is just a CSV that we are passing into this step. And then we are just taking out that city and state and putting it somewhere else. And I think I actually just showed the wrong data for this. That is completely my fault. We are not looking at city and state. We are looking at these different drugs here, or the different drug prices. So again, we're just mapping these different columns to those same fields in our data structure. And that's just using our visual mapper here. So I'm just grabbing that text value and then passing it into our product SKU, since I know that's the first column in our data set is that product SKU. So yeah, hope that helps someone with learning how to upload CSVs and decisions. And then we were just looping through all those different structures that we've created. And then we are just actually creating our data structures by using those CRUD steps that are just available in our steps toolbox. Again, just by mapping in all those different items into our fields. Okay, so I'm going to jump into the other flow that I created for this example, since this is the flow for how we can edit that data itself. So I created a form where we can, again, go ahead and edit that data and submit it so we can have that submission be approved by someone, maybe an admin. And that's where this assign approval form is coming in. So just someone who has to actually check it and make sure that it is okay. And once we go ahead and approve that, we just go ahead and get the corresponding records from those companies, and then go ahead and update all those structures. So I'm sure something's wrong with the way I map these different update structures here, and things happen, but at a high level, that is basically the pattern for how you would be doing this kind of manual evaluation. Now, because we're talking about automation for this whole thing, one of the really important things to talk about are these interceptor rules, or ways that you can use rules to further automate your workflow. So what we have is just an example of, go ahead and go to that. Just another example. This is for an address validation one. And what we're going to do, actually, forget that tangent that I just went on with rules. What we're going to do real quick is just run this workflow that just has a form in it, because we actually have a workflow running behind that form. I know it sounds kind of weird, but what it's doing is it is validating an address for us. So I'm going to go ahead and type in a street address. Go ahead and type in my work address. And what is the address for that? I think it's that. Yeah, that seems about right. Somewhere with 2s and 3s. If you know Chesapeake, the Chesapeake address, feel free to put in the chat since I completely forgot it. But what I'm going to do now is just click on this validate address option. And what that's going to do is it's going to end up calling a service, in this case, the USPS service, and return to us if it has a valid address. We could see here it did not, because I completely forgot what the actual zip code was. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. And that is 23322. So close. And we have the same thing happening there. Let me go ahead and run this again. I know this example will work because I have this address memorized. This is a Museum of Modern Art in Virginia Beach. Okay, cool. Now I'm going to hit validate address. And what we're going to see is that 2200 Parks Ave capitalized itself. So again, we have that normalized address flow, where this is just an active data flow on this form where it's looking at these inputs, and then we can normalize that address before the user even submits it. So this is that step for the USPS call, where we're just passing in our address. And then you can see that we are getting back the actual formatted and validated address here. And then we can use our merge text options to format this in whatever way makes sense. So depending on what the different addresses look like wherever you are. But yeah, that is an example of how we can do some of this manual automation. So that, or some of that automation of our master data management solution. So that wasn't using rules, but you could think of it in kind of the same way, where instead of validating an address like this, you could validate inputs on a form, or you could build a rule that is completely headless and validates entries from a CSV in a batch manner. So you don't have someone coming in and checking them out each time. And to show how that can work, I just have this address normalization example where we're using that same step, that normalize address step. And what we're doing then is after we send in the CSV, that is a list of addresses in Virginia. So again, go ahead and open that just so we could see what information there is. What I think is really cool about this one is we could say, hey, we have the address, the city, and the state. And now we want to put in the zip code for all these addresses. Well, going through and putting in the zip code field by field, that's going to be a complete pain. So we're not going to do that. What we're going to do instead is we're going to upload that entire list of addresses into this step here, parse through it or loop through it with this loop step, normalize each address, and then we are getting the full city, state, and zip code from that address output and storing it in a data structure that we're reporting on. So let me go ahead and debug this flow, and we're going to run our workflow. So this doesn't have to be a constant input for that CSV on this step here. You could have that CSV be passed in from a form or just from an input on your actual workflow. But it just makes more sense for the purposes of this demonstration to actually just upload it. Cool. So we can see that it went through about 200 items, so 198. Sounds good to me. And now what I'm going to do is just go over to a report that I've created that is actually looking at all those normalized addresses. So once it comes back, we can go ahead and see all these different addresses from Virginia that are filled in here, where we're looking at, hey, here's the address, here's the city and state, we already had those, but now we have added the zip code. And because this is just a report in decisions, if we wanted to, we could just go ahead and save this. Oh, excuse me. Here we go, send, not save. That's what we want to do. And let's go ahead and download that as an Excel spreadsheet. And now we will have our normalized Excel spreadsheet, but with our zip codes now filled in over here on the right-hand column. And again, that was just me exporting that actual report from decisions. You could send these via email or PDF if you'd like. You don't have to save them all manually to your system. But yeah, to be completely honest, that is pretty much all I have for talking about master data management today, folks. So I know this was kind of a quick webinar. So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, or anything specifically we talked about that you didn't quite get, or maybe want to see another example of, let us know in the chat. Yeah, other than that, thank you for coming, everyone. Feel free to reach out to us at either sales@decisions.com, or if you need support, support@decisions.com, or call us at one of these numbers here. If you have any inquiries or would like to further talk about the product or maybe set up a demo. Yeah, I'm going to be on the line for like 5 more minutes or so. So feel free to put any questions in the chat or in the Q&A. And I completely forgot to share the polls that we were going to do. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this one and then end that. And let's take a look at the chat, since it seems like we have a few questions in here. Can you see who made changes in the report? I believe so. Yeah, that would be audited somewhere in our system settings. I think you'd actually be looking at a report of who edited that report, basically.
Yeah, and to follow up on that, if you were to right-click on the report and go to your history and open, you would see that audit trail of all the folks that had actually worked on that report.
Ah, that makes a lot more sense. Yeah, so if we go to...
Yeah, if you go up to history documentation actions there on the left, go up a couple. And
wow.
Open view.
Yeah, I work here, definitely. So sorry about that. Yep, here we could see, who changed it, what changes were made. That is just, again, because even I forgot history/documentation actions open/view. And I don't think we're going to be sharing these examples, but on our documentation, we do have some examples you can download, just because different things on our server, you might not know what's going to be in that export as far as our stuff goes. But yeah, feel free to look at our documentation. We have some examples that you can do for build alongs as well, that you can download and import into your own instance. But if you have any questions specifically about what I built here, let me know and I can walk you through it. All right, and reading this one, I'm a bit confused with the part after the EG, the divide input address list to US and row. We can go over how business rule on an address could be configured in a workflow pretty easily, since that would just be, for example, let's go to a flow, maybe our address normalization one. We wanted to see, let's say, US address versus rest of the world. Yeah, sure thing. So maybe if we had, a country code that was along with it, right? And we wanted to see if it was a US input. So I could go ahead and create a rule. Let's just go ahead and make a new one. And it's just going to have, actually, we don't even need to make a rule for this because Decisions has built-in rules. So we could just use our equals string or a string equals rule. And from here, basically what we could do is normalize that address and then pass that info into a rule. We could say if the first input, let's say the country code, and again, that would be data that we select from our flow. I just don't have that actually coming from the normalized address, but I'm sure that information would be out there from another system. We could say if country code, equals USA. If that is true, then create our normalized address. If that is false, skip it. It's not in the States. We don't want it. And that would just go to the next item in our loop just by pointing back here. So I hope that helps to explain how you could use those interceptor rules. Again, that could just be put anywhere in your workflow and can then direct your flow or your logic. And these can be strung together and you can use whatever types of rules are accessible in Decisions. You do not have to use just these statement rules or these pre-built ones. So let me go ahead and show you that example real quick. So it's pretty easy to set it up as an input. So let's say, let's create a truth table. So we're going to make a rule. Let's make a new one, truth table, since that's a table. Just makes a little bit more sense. Let's set up our input data, and that's going to be the master data that I created. So let me go ahead and find that type from our dropdown here. I think it has to be capitalized. Here we go, that master data structure I created. This is now an input in our rule just by selecting that type. So from here, if I want to make another rule, let's make one off of our master data, but let's look specifically at a cost per or price per. We're going to say if price per less than whatever number, it does not matter right now. Then our output, we could have it be, for example, an account, which is actually an object in Decisions. This is a Decisions data structure. And from here, we could then search accounts in the platform. So let's go ahead and search. Let's say admin is going to be our output. We're going to define that. And here, if the master data price coming in is less than 50, our output from this rule is going to be this account. So yeah, it can do more than just give you that true false. You can have outputs of those complex types coming from your actual truth tables. All right, well, thank you everyone for coming. We're going to be calling it now. So thanks for all your questions. Hope to see you next time and have a great morning, evening, or night wherever you are in the world. Take care.